Good morning. Welcome to the session on funding a journey to net zero carbon. Now, funding is always slightly the elephant in the room, and we could spend an hour arguing about whether there's enough funding, where there isn't, how difficult it is to get. So what we wanted to do was to try and take us on a journey to help you leave with some kind of enthusiasm, some kind of commitment, some kind of understanding of how you can start and be on your net zero carbon journey, and how funding kind of fits into that. So we've pulled together a great panel who I will briefly introduce. We've got Mark Greatrex, who is the Chief Executive of Bellevue Place Academy Trust. We've got Nicola Webb, who is the Senior Energy Carbon Consultant from Energy Sparks. Antonia Kayat, who is an Associate at Raft. We've got Matt Fulford from Inspired Efficiency. John Allen from the Southwest Net Zero Hub. And Sharon McHale at the end there from the Department for Education. And I say what we're trying to do is we're trying to take you on a journey of what is the art of the possible and where funding fits into that. So each of the panel members will pick up a little bit on their expertise, and then hopefully at the end there'll be some time for questions where you can pick off some of your questions to kind of better understand this journey. So I'm just going to start. So I'm Sam Johnson. I'm CEO of DB Services, which is a company in the north of England that particularly looks after Church of England schools. And over the past 3 or 4 years, I've delivered about £17 million of PSDS projects across Church of England schools in the northwest, particularly on the retrofit, decarbonisation retrofit of those schools. And within that, we've kind of developed this decarbonisation diamond, which I hope is a helpful tool and a helpful hook for everybody to be able to identify and locate themselves in their net zero carbon journey. And because we work with schools, it's always good to start with an ABC. So we're talking about the A to G of decarbonisation. So the ABC, it's all about attitudes, behaviours and culture. Everything starts with attitudes, behaviours and culture. Leading on from that, we then go to D, which we've slightly amended this, which is data for decarbonisation. So we need data. We've talked a lot about data already today. So how do we get that data? What can we use that for? And how do we know we're collecting and analysing the right kind of data? And we'll pick that up on the panel today. You've then got the E, which is energy. Again, we've talked about energy. We're going to talk more about energy. That's energy procurement, energy saving, energy efficiency, energy generation. And there's lots that everyone can do about energy. The F is fabric improvement, so it might be insulation, it might be double glazing. There's a lot looking at your building and working out what the fabric of the building what needs to happen to the fabric of the building to move to that decarbonised position. And then finally, the G, which is the gas and oil, slightly leave it in there, gas and oil heating systems and what we do with that. Now, one of the challenges for the funding is that we often jump into that last one. How are we going to be able to fund the replacement of our gas and our oil? And it's all very expensive, it's all very, very disruptive, it's all very complex. But one of the things we want to share with you today is actually there's lots you can do about your attitudes, your behaviours, your culture, your data, your energy, your fabric before we get to the funding debate for the gas and the oil-fired boilers. So that's in a way the context of this session over the next hour. And we're going to say lead through that journey in hopefully a helpful way that will leave you with some kind of knowledge and understanding and enthusiasm for jumping onto this journey and being able to feel motivated to do that without funding being the massive barrier that it sometimes can feel it is. So I'm going to pass over straight to Mark, as who's Chief Executive of a Multi-Academy Trust, to talk about the things he's done in the Multi-Academy Trust that hasn't cost a huge amount of money, but has made a massive amount of progress on his decarbonisation journey. So, Mark, you can stay there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your time today, and thank you, Sam, for that introduction. Just to give you a bit of an overview, we're an academy trust of 11 primary schools across London and Berkshire. And the first thing, I've got to move that picture quickly, haven't I? And my slides are pretty rubbish as well today, so I'm a primary educationist, so they're going to be pretty basic for you. But just to give you a sense of the journey that we've been on, we're 11 primary schools, as I say. Our turnover is about £30 million a year, so we're not a massive organisation by any means. We're 3,700 children at the moment, soon to be 4,000 at the end of the academic year. And our challenge, and just to give you a scale of our estate, we've got 5 new build primary schools because we're free schools, hence why we're quite a bit spread out. 4 of them are redeveloped sites as free schools, and 2 of them are maintained 1960s buildings. So we've got quite an okay estate. I've got to admit to you, though, our newer buildings are probably our bigger challenge in terms of the amount of the building management systems are far more complicated than our site managers can ever know. They don't have a PhD in that. And so that was our starting point, but our starting point was quite low when we looked at the carbon zero journey, in the fact that we were barely taking meter readings. We were not really aware of what our energy usage was across our school estate, and we just went for it, really. We've got no major strategy or strategic plan or strategic oversight. We signed up our head teachers with the Great Net Zero campaign that Alex will have talked about this morning, and with the support of a really pushy trustee who was fantastic, we just actually pushed forward, and none of our head teachers were against this. They all were really, really up for the journey. As Sam talked about, the challenge we had to think about was how we finance it, because we don't have the capital reserves to drive this. We don't have the investment to do that. So we worked with, looked at delivery partners and found a great delivery partner. They're here today, E-Energy, and we actually went down the lease-based approach. So what we've done is we've going to describe to you in a minute, and I'm very pleased the department have carried on approving it, the lease-based approach, which is fantastic, because within our accounts we can take on the leases, and we can sign up for something that was 7 years that invests in our solar and our LEDs, but then we don't have to take the massive bet, but we will get those benefits in 5 years. But we're already 2 years into that journey, so by 2029 we're going to hopefully really feel a financial benefit within this approach that we don't in financial at the moment, we just do from a carbon-based approach. So what was I call it a sustainable delivery plan. That sounds a bit grand. But what we started by was doing all our lights, LED lights in the schools. Now, because we had a few new buildings, some of them were LED, but surprisingly not, even though it's built in 2018, one of the schools didn't have LEDs, so we had to change that as well. So all of our schools have got LED arrangements at the moment, which was great. We then have looked at putting solar panels and packing the roofs out with solar panels as much as we possibly can. Not all of our schools were able to do that, I'll be honest. 2 of them are inaccessible. They were 5 floors up, really hard to get to. One of them's got a rooftop playground, so we can't put solar panels on that, but the rest we have been able to fit with it. The main one that I do want to talk about is the smart metering, and I'll come on to that at the moment, because although when we go through the DfE journey, behavioural change is one of the big impact that we will have the long-term impact, we have started just looking at us, that is probably going to be our biggest challenge as we go through that. But we've also looked at SIF bids as well. So we've just up till now been able to apply for SIF funding, and we actually did get £300,000 to upgrade one of our building management systems in the school that was built in 2009, but is our highest energy usage. It went up from £18,000 over the last 4 years to £78,000 our energy costs, which is just huge, even though the building was built in 2009. So apparently it's the BMS. So we're hoping this £300,000 bid will actually save our BMS. Exactly. Haven't seen it yet. And what we're trying to do is drive behavioural change. So those smart meters are informing our ops team, who are supporting our site managers, to understand about those behavioural change. To give you a couple of examples of that behavioural change across our school, one of our classes, we realised they leave the smart boards and leave their computers on overnight. We're actually able to go to those teachers now and say, can we switch this off? I do know Academy Trust that shuts down all their computers at 9:30 every night, which sounds a nice idea. It's a bit fascist, but maybe that's something we need to do. Another example we've got is we've actually fobbed our lifts in one of our schools, so that's only able to be used for people with disabilities and for goods. That saves us £2,000 a year. If we didn't have those smart meters, that wouldn't have actually given us that information to be able to take those actions, which sound quite simple around that. And we are are optimising our site controls at the moment. So we actually give an incentive to our site managers. They get a bonus every year if they reduce their usage every year. And many of them are very motivated to that £250. And just to give you a bit of an overview of the impact of that, just by jumping in, we've reduced our energy consumption by 37%. We're really proud of that and really pleased. And out of ours consumption, actually you'll hear this a bit more on the panel, but actually ours has gone down from 42.5% to 25%. Just by knowing actually how our buildings operate. So we won't have lights on, we won't have laptops on. It is really only the fridges and the necessities that are on over the evenings, weekends and our long summer holidays. And also the lighting has reduced our consumption by 61%. That's why we just went for it in the end. We just knew there were some quick wins that we could really, really go for and get done. And we've got real strong oversight of our energy procurement as well, centrally. So all but 2 of our schools are on half-hourly metering, which is able to give us a little bit more flexibility in the knowledge of that. And through our knowledge, and we've actually got a rebate from Shell for one of our schools of £12,000 this year as well, that we've been able to drive and push this. It's not all buildings. I chair an eco-champion group, which we are trying to teach your children about it as well and get them motivated, because they are actually pushing us on the journey. They want us to see more what we're doing in cutting our buildings, our energy usage across the schools. And as I think Sharon might be talking about later, we've got 8 schools on the located Pathfinder delivery programme, which we're really excited of learning about how the DfE are doing it, because I think the challenge we're all putting today is on funding, but we are putting them the challenge about the roadmap for organisations like us, because we are trying to drive up education standards. It's not the core thing we do, I'm afraid to say, but it is something that can inform the journey. And we do use strong partners and providers. And one thing I wish we'd done as well is collaborate more, because we're a small group of organisations. I think there are frameworks out there that we could have done our journey in a collaboration with groups of other small trusts. And something that I think that's something I would have done if we had done this again. The Everything FM framework is excellent and is actually putting partners together with bigger organisations that are going on the journey at the same time. So I think you guys are working together as an infrastructure bed, and we really welcome that as well. So thank you.
Mark, that's fantastic, thank you. It's a great case study example, and I'm going to pass over to Nikki, because a lot of what Mark was talking about was kind of driven by his understanding of energy, his understanding of data. You work with schools across the country to help them understand their energy data. What are you finding that schools are doing that they could change their attitudes, their behaviours, their culture to save them money and cut carbon?
Thank you. Well, basically everything that Mark's just said.
Right.
So yeah, what we do at Energy Sparks is we take that smart meter data that Mark was just talking about and display it in a really, really easy to understand way. So we put it into charts that are colour-coded so that people can understand what it is, and that staff and students can understand it. And we found last year, or in general, we find that 10% of our schools in the first year of using Energy Sparks reduce their... Sorry. An average school uses... I got that all wrong. Our average school reduces their energy consumption by 10%. And that includes all of the schools, all the ones that completely ignore us and we sit in the corner and go, you should do this. They all together, they reduce their consumption by 10%. So on average, that's about £3,000 per primary school and 13 tonnes of carbon. And that's £12,000 for a secondary school, 48 tonnes of carbon. So it's really like a really big thing that you can do. So I'll carry on with these are my two really big points that I want to make, and I'm going to make them probably in the session that I do later as well. I think they're just really important. So one is just don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Like you said just a minute ago, just jump in, just go for it. Use what you know. If you find some gaps, fill those in as you go and perfect it as you go. And then the other one is just, do you really understand your school's energy consumption? So regularly you see schools that just have this big bill, and this is just what we pay. We're a big school, or we're an old school, or this is just what our payment is. And oh look, the prices have gone up recently, so what we pay has gone up, but very little investigation. So what can you do to work those things out? So the two things, I don't know if you can see this very well. So I'm just going to go with examples completely. So the first thing is just understanding what your boiler is doing. So often, and again when you're talking about BMS, who have these incredibly complicated BMS systems, but no one actually understands how they work, and no one is definitely sure that they're doing what you think they're doing. And we come across so often schools say, our boiler comes on at 6 a.m, goes off at 3 p.m, and we look at their charts and go, no. So a couple of examples here. So where have we got? Northampton Academy. And that's a quote from the facilities manager, David, who's absolutely incredible. And he's one of those people that questions us every minute. He rings us up and says, are you sure? And we say, yes, 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 and he does it. So in the first year of using Energy Sparks, David noticed that their consumption outside of school hours was really, really high. And he was absolutely sure. He's got an incredible background. He is a former heating engineer. He's a home energy assessor. He is fully qualified to run that BMS system. And he found that their heating was on overnight, weekends, holidays, everything. So really simple changes to his timers, to the temperatures, and just to making sure that it was definitely doing what he thought it was doing. They saved 40% of their energy consumption in the first year, which was £34,000 and 82 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So he's our best friend now. Then who have we got up here? So we've got Pembrokeshire School, so this is Johnston School in Pembrokeshire. They noticed, so this chart here, I don't know if you can see the purple bit, I wanted to use this. This purple bit basically shows where they've got their gas on when it's a warm day. So they've got the heating on and it's the summer. And they looked at this chart and went, what? And luckily we had the energy manager from the council in the room at the time, and he went, right, I'm going to fix that. So he did. And basically because it's a really modern school, it's a deck level C, so it should be really, really good, and they just assumed they couldn't improve anything. What it turns out is because it's got underfloor heating and they just didn't switch the heating off in the summer, they assumed that the thermostat would do the work for them. So overnight, it drops below 16 degrees or something, and the boiler goes, and it's probably off again by 9 o'clock, but it's been using gas all night. So this is what they found, so they changed their settings and saved 40% of their energy. Again, I do have some figures, but basically it was huge. So that was just a really exciting one because they just didn't think that they could save anything. So they did a fantastic job. And then finally, I've got Manchester here. So this school, again, absolutely positive that the boiler's coming on at 6 a.m. And going off at 3 p.m. or something. And this school actually spent £600 on gas on Christmas Day last year. And what we worked out that was happening in the end was that their frost protection thermostat was wrong. So when the temperature outside dropped below about 11 degrees, the heating came on. But nobody's there at Christmas Day. Why would anyone think that the boiler was going to come on Christmas Day when it was actually quite a mild Christmas? So we actually haven't fixed this yet. They're still arguing with their facilities, whoever it is that manages it. But, you can see that is definitely on. So that's a really exciting one. So anyway, moving on to electricity, and I know I've absolutely gone over my time. So again, out of school hours, 60% of your electricity is used out of school hours in the average school. So some schools will be much more. So thinking about what is left on, so it should be fridges, freezers, servers, security. There shouldn't be anything else that's left on when the school is closed. So of those things that have to be on, are they the most efficient versions of what they could be? Are they working as you expect them to be? Are there any weird surprises? Is there something coming on at 4 a.m. that you don't know about? And then, what else can you do to switch things off? And remember, electricity is crazy expensive, so it's 70% of your costs are electricity, basically. So this school in Sutton, here, on there, so this, they put in their automatic switch off that you didn't like very much, and it was much earlier. I think it was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Everything on the network goes off. So this is the first year. You can see this is their overnight energy consumption. In the first year it went down, and they saved £20,000 in that first year of doing this. And we asked them about it, how difficult was it? And the guy, the facilities manager, or whoever put it in, he went, and just told them to do it, and they did it. And it was the most simple thing they've ever done. And we've got these benchmarks here as well. So that orange line there is our top 30% of schools. So you can see that this school before was not great. and they are now one of our best performing schools for overnight energy consumption. It's just from one person saying, let's do this. So that was really fantastic. And then what else have we got? So this one up here in Bath, this is a beautiful one because they got their students involved. How much time have I gone over? So they switched everything off in the summer holidays. You can see that lovely big dip here. And the students were like, wow, this is amazing. We've saved so much money. What have we done? And I thought, actually, that's loads. Why aren't we doing this every Friday or every night? And so they did some investigation. They got plug-in appliance monitors and checked what was using the energy. It turned out one of their fridges was using 8,000 kilowatt hours a year and costing them at that time £1,000 a year to run, but now it would be about 3,000. So they got a new freezer, and this is the saving over here. So that's when they got their new freezer. And they saved something like £700 a year from that, and they paid back the investment on the freezer within 4 months. So fridges and freezers are huge. They can be in a small school, they can be a big sort of proportion. And also, another school I'm working with in Swansea at the moment has 30 fridges across their school estate, an estate with 600 students. And I guarantee, I haven't been in, but I guarantee some of them have just got a bottle of milk in. And then finally, this school in Enfield. So this, again, is the importance of comparing what's going on through the day and looking at benchmarks. So this is the benchmark of our top 30% of schools on an average school day. And you can see their middle of the school day is really, really high. But overnight, it's a bit high, but not massively. So this school has since invested in LEDs, and they're almost bang on that 30% now. So they've really come down with their LEDs. But not every school will see that from LEDs. So if you can work out, are we are we spending a lot overnight or are we spending a lot in the middle of the day, then you can work out how to prioritise your actions.
Thank you, Nikki, thank you. I think
thank you.
Mark and Nikki have really demonstrated the amount of things that can be done just about your attitudes, your behaviours, your cultures, looking at your energy. But eventually it does get into buildings. So, Antonia, when it gets into buildings, what do we need to know about our buildings? How do we gather that information? And what are the really key things that actually we need to understand about how our building works?
So we need to know a lot more about our buildings than schools currently know. And just for those of you who don't know Raft, we're architects and, well, we're multidisciplinary, but we go into schools and we do consultancy alongside education. As these guys have talked about, behaviour is such a huge part of getting to zero carbon, so it's important that the schools understand about their buildings, as well as just having consultants come in and telling them what to do with it. They need to know it themselves properly. So what we're finding in schools is, actually I'll stick on that. What we're finding in schools is that they do asbestos surveys, they have condition surveys, they have RAC assessments. All this information sits in different silos, and none of it talks about the performance of their building. None of it looks at the performance of their thermal fabric, none of it looks at the performance of their building systems. And schools, we find, they probably know whether they've got single glazing or how many of their lights are LEDs. They probably don't know whether their cavity walls are insulated or if their roofs are well insulated. And they almost never know what the electrical supply capacity is of their site, and that's absolutely fundamental to putting in air source heat pumps and all manner of electrical items. So we are trying to help schools get that information. And what we're doing is a lot of statewide planning. A lot of it is being funded by LCSF funding, and we're working with councils and diocesan boards of education and with academy trusts to collect information about their schools. So we've looked at probably over 200 schools now across London and the south, and we will collect information about building area and age and geometry. We'll look at what those buildings are made of, their floors, their walls, their roofs, and how well insulated they are. We look at building systems and services. What fuels are they using? How old are they? How efficient do we think they are? We'll look at whether they've got LEDs and PV, all these sorts of things. We try and get supply capacity information out of electricity providers. It's really hard if they don't have half-hourly meters. We know their energy use from their energy bills, and then we can use all the information we've gathered to do energy modelling and peak heat load modelling and things like that. And what this provides is a sort of comprehensive set of information, which we then bring in the condition information and the asbestos information into, that we can sit down then with central estate managers and say, okay, You've got 50 schools. These are your top 10 sort of schools in terms of carbon emissions. These are your top 10 in terms of energy use intensity. We can see that 4 of those have got old gas boilers. They're going to be eligible for grant funding, so you should be prioritising those schools this year for your PSDS applications. And similarly, we can say, we know from your condition surveys that 10 buildings are coming up for roof upgrades fairly soon. We know that 5 of those have poor insulation in them, so you probably want to prioritise them, and you should be thinking about not just doing, yet again, some patch repairs, but properly upgrading those roofs so you can improve the insulation at the same time. So it's about providing the evidence for these central teams to be able to then make informed decisions with regards to decarbonisation planning and also maintenance planning, and critically to integrate those two things, because there's so little money out there, we can't waste opportunities to decarbonise when we're doing basic maintenance work. We have to be combining the two. But to sort of go back to what I said right at the start in terms of the engagement side of things, we think it's absolutely essential for schools to engage. By the way, this image is one of our little schedules that we do with these. So it's like a heat map that's telling them about carbon and the UI and old boilers and things like that for one of our councils. So on the sort of, we think it's absolutely critical that the schools themselves have this information and understand their buildings better. Because if you want to do successful retrofits, if you want to make the sorts of energy reductions that Nikki and Mark have talked about, the building users and the building managers have to be on board. And because, as Alex said, schools are a beacon for the community. If we educate our schools about building efficiency and decarbonisation and climate change, we're going to have a much bigger impact. So what we've now developed is a self-building audit. And this is basically a guided questionnaire that school premises managers can do, and in a few hours they can go around their school and collect a lot of the information that we've been collecting, and we provide diagrams and images and very clear guidance about how to collect that information to try and make it as accurate as possible. And in so doing, they not only do they get to learn about their buildings an awful lot more, they also have then a central repository of key information about their buildings, and that's really important because often that information is held in premises managers' heads and it goes out the door when premises managers leave, so a lot of information is being lost. They get a list of immediate actions that they can undertake, similar to the sort of stuff that Nikki's talking about, to reduce energy consumption very quickly, so things like boiler settings and things like that. And they get a list of recommended retrofit measures that are relevant to their school based on the answers they've given in this questionnaire. So a few schools have trialled this, and we've also run workshops in schools to do this building self-audit. So we actually work with the students and the staff, and we go through parts of the self-audit with them. And so we're teaching kids about climate change, about decarbonisation, about energy efficiency, through learning about their own schools' buildings. And our aim now is to turn this into an online tool called the Zero Carbon Action Builder. So what we're doing is we're putting the building self-audit online, and that will then feed into a centralised database that can be accessed by central estates teams. So the schools will have their own account, they can do the action builder themselves, sorry, not the action builder, they do the self-audit. That will give them an action plan relevant to their school. And then also, really importantly, they can track their progress over time. So they can see, okay, this is where we're at, this is what we need to do to get to zero carbon. We've come up with some targets of what that entails, and we're looking forward to that becoming a kind of nationwide standard for existing buildings. So they know where they need to get to, they know what works they've done so far, what works they still need to do, and they can track their energy and carbon over time and how they're progressing year on year. But critically, that information that the schools are inputting into their building self-audit is going into this central database that multi-academy trusts, responsible bodies and councils can access. And so they can have that kind of raft of information that I just talked about earlier to make their decarbonisation and maintenance planning and have the evidence they need to do that. And so we were really, really pleased to get a grant from Let's Go Zero, so from Ashton's Let's Go Zero Carbon Fund earlier this year to develop this tracker. And we're working with a number of councils and responsible bodies and individual schools, and the aim is to get 200 schools onto the platform by the end of the year, but ultimately it's a scalable thing, so we fully intend to get schools across the country going onto this platform in the foreseeable future.
Great, thank you, Antonia. So we've got lots of information about our buildings, a lot of understanding about our buildings, but at some point we need to try and turn that into some cash to be able to do something with the buildings. And I've been working with Matt for a number of years, particularly in the Church of England schools in the southwest of the country, looking at funding bids and looking at to be able to secure grants to be able to do the work. Matt.
I had to get rid of that picture very quick. That was taken about 10 years ago. Oh, no, come on. Thank you. Yeah, well, so there you go. I'm supposed to be the one that comes up with the money. Yeah, great. And I suppose I just wanted to touch on kind of a few bits and pieces to start off with. Most people in the room are probably aware that there's kind of two parts of a sort of big funding area at the moment. There's the LCSF part of the public sector decarbonisation scheme, and then there's the capital public sector decarbonisation scheme as well. I just wanted to sort of start off with touching on those and then sort of widening it out a little bit. Many of you will probably have looked at the LCSF programme. It can fund that consultancy work, that audit, that advice about what to do in there. So great that schools have that sort of self-audit checklist, and that can go a long way, but actually they can get someone on site, and this is what we do all day, every day, is go onto site, really have a start, getting into the detail, looking inside the cavity walls, counting every light, seeing whether it's LED or not, going into every boiler room, working out what the heating can be done. That's what an LCSF audit ought to be doing for you. I said ought to be, and I got a little feeling around the room. Everyone, maybe some of them aren't. So if that's not doing it for you, maybe have a look at someone that can do that for you. And actually, we've got a lot of data from those, really, really important bits of data. I actually think we need to be feeding that back into policymakers. We've heard a lot about pilots this morning. Guess what? We've got loads, hundreds of thousands of LCSF audits around there. We've already got that data. We don't need to do more pilots. We need to be getting on with it. So this is the sort of things that actually these LCSF audits can be telling you. And this is from a study of 283 happen to be church school audits. Actually, we know what the average energy consumption per metre squared is in there with electricity and gas. Actually, interesting fact of the day, in most schools, average 31% of your light fittings are LED. That means 69% of light fittings in school, on average, aren't yet LED. That's actually moved a little bit since the implementation of the DFC Energy Efficiency Grant that came out in December 22, and schools now implemented that. That has actually gone up a little bit since then. But we've still got a lot of these basics to go out there and do. We're looking at schools. This is the, what's that one? That's electricity use in schools. Across all those schools, per metre squared. So the highest electricity consuming school is using 9 times the amount of electricity per metre squared than the lowest. Now, that's where to go and look for your energy savings. We've heard a lot of good ideas about the sort of things that are being done. Actually, most of those ideas, we're talking about this middle sector here. Whoa, we've got some big stuff going on at that end, but we've got lots to do. So if your LCSF auditors are looking at your estate and telling you where those big problem schools are and where to go and get some of those whacking savings, then they ought to be. Thermally, you've got exactly the same kind of chart in there going, while we've got some really big schools going on up here consuming energy, we've had some of the answers. That frost stat that's set wrong, I'll go and fix that in 2 minutes. All those sorts of things going on out there, and really it ought to be telling you where to go. You can easily check your school. You can do it in 2 minutes. You can go along each display energy certificate and really remember this number here, this heating number. You can go along, see what your heating energy consumption is per metre squared. If it's over 120, worry. You're doing something wrong and you need to sort it. Really simple. And go up there and do that. You actually don't need an LCSF order to tell you that. But we know from all these findings the sorts of things that we need to spend some money on. And these are the sorts of things that typically come up in school after school after school. So we know there's LED lighting to go and do. We know it's applicable to about just over 90% of schools need to do some form of change. It might only be a couple of lights, it might be every light in the school, and it will save them about a third in their electricity. That's averagely what it can come up with. We know there's PV panels to go and do. We know that they can generate about a third of the school's electricity consumption, and we know it's applicable to around about 80% of the schools in the country. We've got loads out there that we can go and do. We know there's cavity wall insulation to go and do. We know there's building fabric to improve. That's the sort of things that Raft are coming up with, helping schools to realise out there. We know, because we've looked in a lot of cavity walls in lots of schools, there's applicable to over about a third of schools in the country have unfilled cavity walls. We can just go out and do this. With roof insulation, and I'm talking about the easy loft insulation stuff here, not the kind of the slightly more difficult flat roof insulation that's got too wet and needs sorting out because it wasn't installed properly in the first place. But in easy loft insulation, 20% of schools have got roofs which haven't got adequate loft insulation in them. We can go and sort that really easily. Pipework insulation, half of the schools in the country haven't got their pipes properly insulated, and we know that within 40% of schools in the country, we've got some form of single glazed window. Again, it might be one window, it might be all of them in the school. That's the sort of things that we've got and we need to be looking at. We know what to do. It's really simple. It's straightforward. Everybody's thinking, yeah, Matt's just talking about common sense here, but why haven't we done it? And then we get on to the more difficult stuff, those two orange bits out there. This is where the decarbonisation is happening. We've got to sort out how we're generating our hot water. We know, actually, in most schools, electric point of use is probably going to be the easiest and simplest way to go. It really works really very well. It's not necessarily the right thing everywhere. That's where you might need some advice in terms of what is best to do everywhere. And we know we need to be changing our fossil fuel boilers out for something that's probably going to look like a heat pump in some way, shape or form. So the problem is, how do we fund all of that? That's what there is there to do. Well, we probably can work this out. The PV, the LED, we know is able to be funded by a repayable finance model. We'll hear more about those repayable finance models later. We used to have a good one. We got rid of that. Never mind. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Maybe we could bring that back. Maybe we can bring something else back. But we know there's a solution. Those measures out there, the PV, the LED, can be funded by a repayable finance model. It's got the payback so that it can do that. We've got all these issues at the bottom, these green ones here, they're all a condition issue. That £1.8 billion a year that we heard about earlier of condition funding needs to pay for those kind of things. Is that £1.8 billion enough when we've also got to pay for all our leaking roofs and other bits and pieces that are going wrong? Well, I'll let you make your mind up and lobby on that one. And then the PSDS bit funds that top bit. That's changing out the boilers for heat pumps and doing that decarbonisation. So if you think that PSDS is going to do it all, it's not. If you think that repayable finance models are going to do it all, it's not. That only just touches the surface. If you think you need to use condition funding to do it all, it's not going to cover it all, and we need to use these other things. So we need to have this complex mix out there. The problem is they don't join up properly at the moment, and we can talk for hours on, SIF schemes not combining with PSDS in terms of timing and risk on both areas, and it's all complex and difficult, and that's what we need to really help to unwind that. We've got some issues with PSDS. It's massively oversubscribed. But actually we do need to be looking at boiler life. That ought to be the prioritisation for decarbonisation. If your boiler is at the end of life, that's the time to invest in doing something. It's logical, it's common sense. Boiler lives in the schools probably aren't 10 years, they're going to be more than that. I did see a boiler the other day in a school that was older than I am. I'll let you work out that's more than 10 years old. Quite a lot more than 10 years old. So we need to be prioritising on that basis. This is from a larger state, what the boiler ages look like. We've got some down here, basically back to 1983. And it's that side of the graph, that 20% of boilers that are end of life, that we ought to be focusing on. So I would put into an argument there about actually why is PSDS actually starting to fund some of these middle-aged boilers rather than focusing just on these old-aged boilers out there. But that's where we ought to be spending our effort in there. A few tips around PSDS applications, because this is what everybody asks for. It's all now based, and it will increasingly be more based now on carbon savings. That's probably right. So looking at sites which have the highest carbon intensity out there, your deck's very useful for that. Remember that 120 figure? Well, if you're over that, you're definitely going to be looking at PSDS. It's going to fund you fairly well. But really, buildings with decks E, F and Gs are going to be performing better on a PSDS application. Again, oil sites will perform better than gas because oil's a higher carbon intensity fuel. Other tips around it with PSDS applications. consider air-to-air heat pumps alongside all other decarbonisation options. For some reason, I do know why, PSCS is a little bit sniffy about kind of air-to-air heat pumps, but in fact, they're probably a very good solution for 60–70% of schools out there. So if you're not considering that within your LCSF audits and reviews and considering that within PSC applications, you're probably missing a trick. So have a look at that. Hot water systems rarely work well with a combined heating pump. So if you've got a heat pump doing heating and hot water, you might end up with a few difficulties and you might be spending more money doing it. So do have a think about those sorts of things in there if those are solutions that are coming up with. Other solutions out there, you definitely know you're going to need to prepare early. You need to be thinking about the level of design that you're doing, and I'd say you need a really good outline design of your chosen solutions. You don't need a detailed design of every possible measure that you absolutely could maybe do in the school in there. And remember that planning permission, getting DNO approval if you need to increase your capacity, and perhaps try looking at solutions that don't need to increase your capacity, and procurement are all going to be seen as the biggest risks out there. So make sure that you've nailed those risks before you put in a PSC application. That was a very quick canter through, so you can probably tell I could speak for ages on it, but I'm going to hand over and we'll look forward to some questions later.
Mark, thank you so much. John, you've been working in this area for a long time, offering support and building partnerships. I think that's you. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
You could,
that picture.
No picture.
No, I lost my picture.
sorry.
Never mind. It didn't need it. Oh, look,
There you go.
there's a picture. Yeah, do you want me to go? Yeah, sorry. I love listening to Matt because I just want to argue so much and also massively agree with a huge amount of what he just said and get annoyed because he's just covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. So I work at the South West Net Zero Hub. In case nobody knows who we are, there are 5 Net Zero hubs all over the country. We're government funded. We're funded by DESNES, and this is where it gets confusing because DESNES like to be called the department, which then when we've got the proper education, a bit over the top. But, so we have multiple different remits in what we do, from massive scale like development projects with all public, local authorities, hospitals, everything like that. I work in the sort of buildings decarbonisation team. We're actually funded specifically by the LCSF team. We kind of got involved in this, it must be about 18 months ago, and it was actually Salix that came to us and just said, we're really struggling to get schools into this area, and they were like, can you help? It's like, yeah, of course we can. So we forced our way out, and actually I think that's where we first had our introductory call to start talking about what you were doing and what we could do in terms of that support. It was around that sort of £500 million energy efficiency grant where schools were coming to us going, what do we do? And so we were able to kind of provide those different levels of support. Now, what we do in that initial aspect is we will sometimes reach out and sometimes have schools come to us. When I say schools, we deal with multi-academy trusts. And my God, the level of where everybody is huge. We always try and talk about it in terms of like your scale of 1 to 10, of 1 being I don't have a clue what I'm doing, and 10 being we're pretty much at net zero already. We come in everywhere. Now, I'm not really bothered about getting someone from 1 to 10. I'm bothered about getting someone 1 or 2 stages along on that pathway, and that's how we've been sort of asked to do that. Now, our MOU from DESNES was so wide in, they kind of said, can you just do something, work out what the best thing to do in this area is? But there was a really nice key point in there, which was help organisations that are struggling to do this. And that just screams the multi-academy trusts. We regularly have conversations with multi-academy trusts. And it's these lovely facilities managers that have been given a net zero 2030 target, just going, yeah, off you go. And they really, it's sort of rabbit in headlights situation. And that's where I feel like we come in and really can provide that level of support and it's bespoke to everybody. And I really feel like we kind of can provide a huge amount of input within that. So we do an awful lot in terms of that support. I sort of think of that as kind of like feeding down support, but we also work very closely with DESNES. So working on the LCSF massively changed this year, partly, I'm going to be really boastful, partly because of us. We went in and just said, look, these are the issues with LCSF. I don't think it was perfect. It's obviously just finished a few weeks ago. But, oh my God, I think it was such a big step change in being much more prescriptive in, I never know if that's a real word, but prescriptive in what they're trying to deliver and actually saying, look, this is how you can deliver it, in the sense of trying to get more value for money. Schools seem to be pretty good at applying to LCSF, but still not that great in translating that over to PSDS. So I will sort of say there are a lot of changes to PSDS this year in terms of phase 4. We have no idea what that's going to mean. And this, you said it, value for, when they're calling it, they originally called it value for money against carbon saved. We don't know what that means. And then last week it was just carbon saved in the recent press release. So we're working really hard with DESNES to try and find out how that's going to work. The reason that I'm pushing hellishly hard with it is I want to know how that's going to impact on smaller schools. And again, you've said it already to me in the, that carbon saving, whoever's going to save the most amount of carbon is going to win. So it makes that sort of like, it's going to make it really, it may make it harder. So that's where I would love to get feedback from people in terms of how, if there is a PSDS application you submitted, is there an easier way of doing it? How can we combine, and again, you've said it already, but how can you combine pieces of work? I'd love to, we're looking at how you can combine a SIF application with a PSDS. We looked at how you can combine UKIB applications with PSDS there. No, essentially, you can't, because PSDS need to know you've got a UKIB secured, and UKIB need to know you've got PSDS secured, so it doesn't work. So next week we're going into heat networks. How can we get a heat network, an HNDU fund to combine with PSDS, and that's going to sort of impact that sort of higher education quite a bit as well in terms of being those heat loads that come off from there. So we do work in loads and loads of different, we spread ourselves thin in a funny way, but our focus really is, I was really pleased from this point of view, is we just try and work with many organisations. So we pushed as many organisations as we could through LCSF, and from that, and I say pushed, made them feel silly for not applying. There was no reason, the question was, there is no reason you're not applying for LCSF. I cannot find, we spoke to an NHS, sorry, not that's quite the same, an NHS organisation that received 500 million last year. And we said, you need to apply again, you didn't get everything. So that combination of things going across. And so also within that, I think we like to make sure we work as that kind of connection between all the different groups. So Energy Systems Catapult are doing a massive amount of guidance and specific schools guidance right now. I like Energy Systems Catapult, and we've been trying to feed as much into their work as possible. It's really, it is really useful. It's a massive amount of information, and it needs to sort of be filtered down. But working with Alex as well, it's really clear that there's a really good position for Let's Go Zero. It's really clear that there's a good position for where we come in, support with that kind of DESNES funding. And then I think there's also that really good position for what you're doing in terms of the accelerator. And there's all these different bits all around, and we need to try and combine them all together as much as possible. And so that, I just want to keep being involved in that conversation. And I think we will get to a point where, we can start. It's so hard to get this done, and I think hopefully we can do as much as we can to get that through. But I'm going to let you go.
Great, thank you, John. Sharon, thank you for being part of the panel. I think clearly the department has been really supportive of this agenda for a number of years, and is continuing to evolve in terms of what it's looking at and what it's funding. We've talked about some of the challenges of the loan funding and the SCA funding and the PSDS funding. So what's happening in the department at the moment, and kind of what's the strategic thinking of where that's going to go in terms of funding over the next few years?
Sure. Okay. So I head up innovation in the Education Estates Directorate in Department for Education. I'll cut right to it, I think, because I'm kind of hearing that we've done enough Pathfinders, we've done enough pilots, haven't we? I wouldn't dare use this term to describe what we're doing on the Net Zero Accelerator service now. Instead, perhaps I describe it more in this territory, which is we're trying to get in the car, we're trying to drive as fast as we can, bust the average speed cameras, attract the crowd, hope they're cheering. I'm seeing the blue light in the rearview mirror of Treasury come to get us, but I'm hoping a politician is looking, seeing the crowd cheering so much and saying this is a race we want to run, and they're prepared to pay for it. So not a pilot, should we describe it like that? And so what are we doing at the moment? Well, we're working with Located on trying to give all these good ideas and all these proven technologies and inputs scale. Because to be fair to any investor, Treasury or private investment, and there is a lot of investment that is interested in green, ethical, proven models that produce a return for their investors, but they're prepared to look at long and patient returns if they're reliable and are backed up by good, valid data sets on emissions reductions. A lot of those funds have green objects in them now, so they are actually looking for investment vehicles. But as great as some of our interventions are, you know, these funds move at scale. And to be fair to Treasury, even if they had the money, they would be asking us, what's your delivery model? How can this move at scale? We can't do just little patches. You know, we move at scale in the UK government. So this is looking at how we can explore a business operating model that can scale up a lot of what we're doing and can attract that sort of crowd around us. And what are we doing? Well, Located have worked with a number of consortia partners on a feasibility phase, working with groups of schools, exploring with partners, some of whom are here today, I know, exactly what packages of interventions have an impact, what degree of impact they have, what must always, at the moment, given pricing, be grant-led, and what can perhaps attract an investment model, be that a kind of Salix CDL-backed model, or be that some sort of private investment model. And what those feasibility reports came up with is a set of interventions that brings schools in a regional batching methodology, because that's where you get the scale, that's where you get the savings, and that's where you get the market more interested in retrofit. Because otherwise it's a very piecemeal, negotiate with individual trust governing bodies kind of piece of work. So we need to bring the industries with us as well. So if we batch up a net zero accelerator service by region, and we look at exactly some of those low-hanging interventions, which we've discussed today, are so needed still out in the system. And we have a consortia partner that handholds schools through some of the behaviour change, through some of the smart metering, through some of that visibility about how they could better manage their building management systems. Does that produce a return as a batch for those schools? Well, we've heard today it definitely does. Is that an investment model? Possibly. Is that a model you could bring to Treasury? Possibly. And then once you've done all those sort of lower hanging fruit interventions, you get up to some of those more installation type activities that do cost money. Have you saved enough in batch 1 to recycle that into batch 2? Maybe over several years, but is there a way we can accelerate that? And is there a way we can give visibility in the funding to Treasury or an investor that the maintenance impact of some of these interventions and the condition management of that, as well as the energy bill savings, means that if we invested sooner, got better scale, got a better pace, that actually, again, this can pay for itself as well. And a lot of this is now very proven technology. The last batch there, we've got batch 3, are those interventions which, where we do have a pounding grant to put, it's probably where we will still need to put it, because there isn't a commercial investment return model on some of those high cost interventions. But at least we would know by triaging schools through this delivery map that those schools that perhaps are now ready for public sector decarbonisation schemes, for example, have prepared themselves well, and it isn't just first past the post who's pressed the button quickest. They've actually looked at those behaviour changes, they've looked at the solar installs, and they're better placed and suited to a heat pump installation. And is there something around this route map as well, where we look at some of those condition improvement funds and how they operate at the moment? Whereas if we are doing some of these net zero interventions, is there an overlap with the condition funding as well? And we make a better join up on that. So what are we doing next? Working with Located, they're looking for some consortia partners to actually start to deliver this. Starting at small scale, we have to work with the capital funds we've got. But the ambition of this is not to prove that solar repays itself or that smart metering is, a useful tool. We know that. What we've got to prove to investors, whoever those are, is that we can travel at pace and scale. We've got the capacity, schools are up for this, and we can do this at pace and scale. To be fair, that's something we need to show as an operating model to attract that sort of investment. So this is our attempt to start the car on the race. We'll be relying heavily on all the people on the panel here today. You can see where you might fit in those route maps. And you can see how this model might translate, and this is where education is uniquely placed in those discussions with Treasury, because our reach into inspiring younger people and making that connection with skills, construction skills, green skills, so that you can replicate this in housing, business, health, justice. We're in a very good position with our estate to demonstrate that this can be done at scale and pace, and it can be afforded, certainly at the moment up to a certain stage on that model, and we're making best use of any pound of grant that we have on those things where we can't stack it up as an investment model. So, not a pilot. Starting the race.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for outlining that. Colleagues, we are right up against lunch, which I know is not the greatest place to be. So I'd just like to thank all the panel. Thank you to Sharon, to John, to Matt, to Antonio, to Nikki and to Mark. I know Mark has got to go and see an Ofsted inspector, but I think the rest of them are around over lunch and will be delighted to have conversation and take questions. So thank you for being with us today, and I hope that was helpful, and I hope that's prompted some questions and given you some ideas of what the next steps you might be able to take. Thank you.